What's up, beautiful people? Today we're going to be checking out how Western propaganda destroyed Libya. Let's get to it.
Which called for all necessary measures to protect Libyan civilians from the forces of Muammar Gaddafi.
In February 2011, Libya changed for the worse. Other Arab countries such as Tunisia, Egypt and Yemen in the previous months had experienced political turmoil. Western media quickly labeled these uprisings as the Arab Spring. They took for granted that it was a sort of revolution against repression and dictatorships.
I suppose a better name would be the Arab Autumn. Anyway, the trigger of the riots began in Tunisia, with the suicide of a poor street vendor who set himself on fire because he couldn't stand the constant harassment by the local police.
In Cairo instead, the protests in Tahrir Square against the Mubarak government came from the youngest, who blamed corruption and unemployment.
The vast majority of people had three simple demands: social justice, work, and the possibility of living a normal life. In Libya the situation was initially the same, but the reasons that led to the civil war were quite different.
In 2011, Libya had a very distinct political situation from Tunisia and Egypt. Although ruled by an authoritarian and highly questionable leader, Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's small population, only 6 million people, enjoyed a decent standard of living, better than one might have thought, even better than Yemen or Lebanon. The oil and gas industry had absorbed most of the skilled workforce and people, allowing the nation to enjoy most of the profits.
How was it possible? Simple, with a strong control by Gaddafi.
Keeping a tight control on political and economic issues, through a system of loyalty built over the years with alliances, nepotism and money, Muammar Gaddafi managed to maintain power for an extraordinarily long period of time, from 1969. In that year, Gaddafi, or as he was called, the Rais, proclaimed with a coup d'etat the beginning of the Arab Republic of Libya.
After surviving several attacks by the US in the 80s, Gaddafi gradually normalized his relation with the West, and by the early 2000s he was seen as a tough head of state. Some European leaders even tolerated him with an unwritten pact: you don't give us any trouble with migrants, and we'll just leave you alone.
So at that time in Libya there weren't significant riots, and the popular dissent was limited to some extremist elements. Anyway, the Tunisian and Egyptian revolts had convinced one of the Arab Gulf countries, Qatar, that it was possible to overthrow Gaddafi's power from the outside, by relying on the help of moderate Islamic forces in Libya. The Emirate of Qatar presented itself to the world as a country in favor of the fall of the North African dictatorships, so to gain an area of influence in the region.
The reason was pretty simple:
to stand out and prevail against its nemesis, Saudi Arabia. While Saudi Arabia was traditionally protecting radical and ultra-conservative Islamist forces, such as the Wahhabis and Salafists, Doha supported and financed more moderate and actively committed Islamic fundamentalist groups, like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, a fringe group that Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates had always considered an existential threat.
February 16 and 17, aka the Days of Wrath, as they were called, were completely unexpected, especially in the eyes of many analysts who knew that Libya was one of the most stable states in the region. Even Gaddafi was taken by surprise and reacted with confusion.
Everything started in the east, in Cyrenaica, in the city of Benghazi. It was very clear that the events that were happening in the east of Cyrenaica were something different from a simple revolt, and much more complex than a simple local insurrection. This was proven by facts, such as the coordinated actions and the large availability of weapons that circulated. Things that clearly demonstrated the presence of a plan at the base of everything.
Where
We
did you
shouldn't
get the
underestimate
weapons?
the quick reactions of some European governments, in particular the French and British, who instantly supported the rebels.
More specifically, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy had been convinced by his personal advisor and friend, Bernard-Henri Lévy, that in Libya, with the rise of the so-called Arab Spring, there was a window of opportunity to overthrow Gaddafi's as well. An opportunity that could have offered the French access to a very rich market for both the energy and military sectors. On TV, newspapers and radios, a narrative began to spread around the Libyan crisis, based on the logic that Gaddafi's regime was repressing in blood a peaceful and popular revolt.
This narrative began spreading from Qatar, which broadcasted images of violence, destruction, anger and death in a systematic manner, to the point of convincing European public opinion that Gaddafi had unleashed a massacre with the aim of maintaining his power and privileges.
The Qatari news described how the Libyan Air Force indiscriminately bombed the urban areas of Cyrenaica, creating thousands of victims among civilians.
Beyond this, the media spoke of mercenaries under Gaddafi's payroll who were stuffed with Viagra and were guilty of raids and rapes against the population, something that actually wasn't proven at all.
So as you watch the videos tonight and watch the program tonight, ask yourself this: who do you believe? A dictator's words or your own eyes and ears?
Ironically, however, most Libyans refrained from participating in the uprisings. They basically feared reprisal from the regime.
Their passiveness allowed Gaddafi's troops to recapture most of the country in a few weeks and move quickly towards Benghazi to crush the rebellion once and for all.
Faced with an almost certain defeat, the rebels of Cyrenaica requested the military intervention of the West.
On March of the same year, a hesitant NATO, as well as an even more reluctant United States, were involved in a brief but significant mission, Operation Odyssey Dawn. The Libyan Air Force was wiped out, and Gaddafi forces were stopped before entering Benghazi. According to unofficial sources, there would have been an agreement between NATO, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar before starting the raid. An agreement signed only one day before Qatar acknowledged the official nature of the CNT. There is the National Council of Transition Against Gaddafi. According to some, UAE involvement in Libya, for example, would allow Abu Dhabi to deepen its strategic relations with France. Others said that Qatar was prone to agree because it could benefit from exclusive access to some of the Libyan oil reserves. They would trade it on behalf of the new Libyan government that would have risen after Gaddafi.
But Qatar was hardly the only voice in the oil business.
Already in April 2011, French companies expressed their willingness to settle in the country. As revealed by the State Department in 2016, some emails found in the servers of Hillary Clinton, the US Secretary of State at that time, an open supporter of the uprisings, referred to alleged French humanitarian flights to Libya, to which groups of executives from two major French companies, Total and Vinci, actually traveled. As stated by a close Clinton advisor in one of these emails, French intelligence agents had described Sarkozy's interest in Libya as being based on the desire to obtain a greater share of oil production.
Gaddafi didn't behave well against Westerners.
Gaddafi first reacted by interrupting any collaboration with Western oil companies in Libya to protect his fields, which resulted in a 30% increase in the price of natural gas. This of course deeply worried the main NATO powers, first and foremost France, Great Britain and the US. On the other hand, as officially stated by Alain Juppé, the French foreign minister at that time, it was right and logical that French companies could defend their position and benefit from the war in Libya. According to the French
It was right and logical to do that.
newspaper Libération, speculation about the real motivations for the French intervention were based on a letter that rebel forces had sent to Sarkozy in April 2011. The rebels offered France 35% of Libya's oil and gas in exchange for French support for the insurgency.
As we can well imagine, that was a way not only for France but also for other European powers to reduce their dependence on Russian gas imports.
In the email unclassified number 2014-2043-9 called The French Client and Gaddafi's Gold, sent in April 2011 by a close Clinton aide, Sidney Blumenthal, the main motivation for the French attack was endorsed by the White House and was totally hidden to other allies such as Italy or Germany. According to the report, France had attacked Libya because Gaddafi's short-term intention was to replace the African franc, the CFA, in the French African territories, with a new local currency. The email in short term was that Gaddafi's large reserves of gold and silver, estimated to be 143 tons, were a real danger for the survival of the CFA franc itself.
Before this happened, I just saw a video by Museveni sharing the story of, this occurrence. He said about 6 or 7 leaders from African Union went to speak with Gaddafi to kind of re-establish business and, bring down the tension. But while they were going there, they got a call from NATO. NATO, outside of Africa, called these leaders and asked them to go back to their countries. And when they came back to their countries, then, Gaddafi was taken out. That was the kind of like the detail Museveni shared in the last video.
New currency could have given the countries of the Francophone Africa an alternative with which to achieve economic independence from France. It was for this reason that the air bombings of the joint military intervention from Qatar, France and British Royal Air Force crushed Gaddafi's naval and air defenses, resulting in the collapse of key strongholds for the regime such as Tripoli and Sirte, cities in which Gaddafi, on the run, had been hiding for some time.
Surrounded by the rebels in October, Gaddafi tried to escape through the desert, but military drones sent by the Obama administration intercepted his convoy. The rest of the story is history, a story rather bloody and well known.
Gaddafi was captured by the rebels, kneecapped, raped with a wooden stick and executed with a gunshot to the head. All this was recorded and stored on video. Only at that point, NATO stopped operating and abandoning Libya to its destiny.
That's wild.
But once the old master Gaddafi was dead, the race for the Libyan resources had just begun. US sources stressed to the various departments the importance of not allowing countries such as Turkey or Italy to invade the field designated for US, France and Qatar.
The death of Gaddafi aroused mixed reactions in Libya. There were those who rejoiced, those who were still attached to the memory of the old leader, and those who knew that the future crisis would make the old regime be regretted. What resulted from the fall of Gaddafi was dictated by the historical dualism that separated Cyrenaica and Tripolitania, a polarization that led to a de facto separation in two of Libya. With the rise of Islamist groups and small local gangs, around 300 of them, and with the breakup of the old alliances between the various tribes in the southern part of the country, Libya turned into anarchy, where no one was actually in power anymore and where everyone had its own interest. History teaches us that Libya has been torn by two civil wars. The first ended with the death of Gaddafi in October 2011, and the second began in 2014 and still ongoing.
The truth is that the war has never ended. It always went on. And from the Arab Spring, Libya moved to the Arab Winter.
On one hand, there were the national forces loyal to General Haftar, who had settled down in Cyrenaica, in Tobruk. He soon stood out as the strong man in charge, with the claim that the General National Congress mandate was expired. Haftar was backed and financed by the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, France, Syria and Russia. On the other hand, there was a whole series of various forces in Tripolitania under the umbrella of the Government of National Accord, whose ex-Prime Minister, al-Sarraj, was accused by Haftar of terrorism. From 2012, this side was supported by Turkey, the US and the European Union. Basically, al-Sarraj blamed Haftar for his purpose to bring back a Gaddafi-style regime. A long stalemate to control the main oil deposit followed the first phase of war, until 2012, when peace talks began with the commitment to stabilize the country. Obviously, terrorist organizations such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda have entered the Libyan chaos, and this didn't make it any easier to solve the conflict. With the demise of Gaddafi, organized crime has taken even greater advantage of weapon trafficking and migratory flows from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe, creating a very profitable business. Prior to the revolution, Libya boasted Africa's largest oil reserves. Oil, which once accounted for 96% of the country's income, is now just a memory. From a peak of at least 1.5 million barrels a day before the war, Libya is now lucky if it can export a quarter of that.
Today Libya is in a very serious state. Personally, I can only hope for the best for a nation that geopolitically is fundamental for the stability not only for North Africa, but also for Europe. The old Libyan motto used to be freedom and unity. Well, let's hope again that it will become so again, as soon as possible.
Wow, that was a very good video. Yeah, when all this happened, I was young, like a lot younger. So the information I was hearing, like as a kid, because we heard it in Nigeria. You know, I'm Nigerian. We heard it in Nigeria. It was more like, oh, Gaddafi is a bad person. Oh, Gaddafi is doing this. He's killing people. Like at that time, it almost felt like killing Gaddafi was a win from what I was hearing in the information. Then I grew up. Then I was noticing a lot of people were saying Gaddafi was the savior of Libya, and he could have saved Africa too. I'm like, is he not the same man you guys used to say he was a killer, he did this, he did that he was the worst person? Why is he the savior today? Is it because he died? Because usually when people die, that's when they become the best. People give them their flowers after they die. And almost everything you thought you knew or every news you thought you've heard that were true and they were correct, apparently was all false, was all generated. It's like, this is what we want you to think. Think it. And they give it to you. I was watching a video by Thomas Sowell the other day. He said, the worst thing is not that you don't know, is that you have been imposed a feeling. I forgot how he put it. But basically what he meant was, it's not that you don't know, it's that you don't even know how to know. Like, you don't know how to think. They're giving you a different mind from what is yours. So you're not even thinking anymore. It's just what you've been imposed on. That's what you're expressing, and you think you're the one thinking about it. So that's what propaganda has done. A lot of the things now, propaganda, even the way politicians speak. Yeah, if you go research and read about propaganda, just go read articles and try to understand more about propaganda, you're going to see that most of the politicians, even with the normal responses, it's basically propaganda, because it's all scripted. It's all scripted. They just have what they have to say. So no matter what you ask them, they'll turn it around and round and round and round and still go back to the same propaganda. Well, I don't like to use that word a lot. So if my videos, you don't hear me use a lot of propaganda, because I don't want to dilute the word. But do your own research, read about it and you'll understand more. Anyway, this is the end of this video. It was quite long. I won't keep it longer. Probably did already, but share your thoughts, smash the like button. I'll see you on the next video. Peace. I made this